Oh, and perfect timing. It's great to see Jared and Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. Thank you for stopping through. In a recent discussion that Jared had with Professor Dylan Rodriguez, who I'm citing in this book chapter, by the way, there was this sort of beautiful moment where I thought, without meaning to, inadvertently, the brilliance of the conversation added depth and some serious political analysis and breadth and depth to the Vernon philosophy. As I've been saying for years, the Vernon philosophy is an oversimplification and even a political a softening of sorts of a variety of more militant and radical analyses around media and radical politics. So one, again, I'm stealing, as I said, the kafia on the chair idea from Dylan. So that was one other thing I'm biting from that show. I saw this piece, so I want to share this excerpt. The link is already in the show description to the whole discussion, but I just want to share this excerpt here because I love when more politicized, better versions, in fact, of what I'm attempting here are done. So let's start there, and then we can double back. So this is again from Dylan Rodriguez on lexical warfare and counterinsurgency. If you missed that, please
Much
out. And this is I just picking it up here.
appreciated. Yeah, actually, as you were talking about the term terrorist, I was thinking about I don't know if people have seen this movie. I'm probably self snitching that I watch so much bad stuff, but um September 5th, which is about the 1972 Munich Olympics. And I think actually, unsurprisingly, it has some nefarious narrative and propagandistic purposes within it as well, particularly coming out, in this time when there's a genocide going on in Palestine that's being perpetuated by Israelis. But it's about the incident in which some Israeli Olympians were basically taken hostage, taken prisoner at the Olympics in Munich in 1972. But there's an interesting scene in the movie that I am kind of fascinated by. And I want to say it's Peter Jennings. It's one of these like very, and obviously this is all dramatized. It's not a documentary or anything like that. But they're trying to figure out what to call the Palestinian militants who have taken these Israeli Olympians hostage. And, they're I think it's Jennings who's saying like, well, no, they're commandos, or they're like, they're militants, right? And so he's spent more time in the Middle East, right? And it's in a different political context in which, forms of armed struggle have a much broader acceptance, and there's a certain acceptance of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and which wasn't party to these particular this action. So he's actually in the movie, right? And I have no idea
And my bad, just quickly, but and I'm biased but going through the grad program in journalism at Maryland and and taking classes with Peter Jennings' literal colleagues and peers, albeit the ones who went to grad school instead of going on camera as and I think Jennings stopped at a high school education, in fact, which I think speaks to why he maybe had a slightly higher level of political clarity. But 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 I am biased by at least being aware of the perspective that I do believe they believed. That is, his peers believed that right or wrong, there is this professional objectivity in journalism that was super important. So there was for a time and in certain settings this attempt to defend the profession of journalism with a kind of objectivity that might have been impacting, because I could see some of my former professors trying to make that case, like we're fully for Israel, but come on, we've got to make, I could just see them anyway. So I just throw that in there.
veracity of any of this, right? But he's in the movie actually kind of advocating them to use a term that retains some political agency for the people who are actually have, taken these Israelis hostage and who have some sort of political agenda around it. And other producers and so on, basically the term terrorist comes out and he's like, no, you can't say that. That's very politically charged. It has this, we can't just use that term. And eventually he gets overruled and the producers decide. And I believe part of the point of showing this is I believe this was the first time that the word terrorist was actually uttered on network television. It's an interesting thing because, I mean, just that turn and how far away that we are, like, at this point, there would never be any discussion.
My bad again. It's also Chomsky and Herman's point that it doesn't matter how liberal the newscaster or the journalist is. It's the politics of the executives and the owners and the advertisers that determines the on-air content. So just yeah.
Discussion within a newsroom when somebody starts to use that term of whether it's acceptable or not. If it's not a if it is a state actor who's committing the act, it's going to be condoned or whatever in some sort of way. Like linguistically, there's going to be some defense of state violence. But if it is a non-state actor, then they're unequivocally going to use that term. And I just say that to say it's an interesting example of how much of a shift that we've had in an understanding of anti-colonial struggle and of an acceptance of a validity of forms of armed struggle to a place now where that is always demonized. And I mean, we see this too with, even in LA, right, with the uprising around ICE that started there, that has proliferated in a lot of ways around the country, that this is all, being demonized by all sides, even as the liberals trying to co-opt it is an interesting thing, or trying to defend in some way their sort of state sovereignty or whatever they would call it, from the National Guard or the Marines and federal oversight. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that specific example, not necessarily the movie, because I'm sure you didn't probably waste your time with it, but just that
I've wasted my time on
shift in
plenty.
framing.
Yo, I've wasted my time on plenty of shit. I'm with you. Like, I'm not gonna talk about. I don't want to like endorse any of the shit that I watch, so I'm not even gonna mention. But like, I'll just understand that I'm like, I sit there on that fucking couch with you and shit, right? Like, I think a lot of people that are watching and listening to this probably can relate. But like, I tell you, I think it's important. Let me just back up. Let me say, I think we need to not apologize for that, even though it is kind of embarrassing, right? I actually think we need to actively engage in kind of like a collective critical viewership around some of this shit, because if we can bring our gifted collective analytical sensibilities to this shit, like, it's popular cultural propaganda. All right. So like the way you just broke it down for us is really, it's like, that's a fucking gem, man. Like, you just gifted a bunch of people with tools to bring to screening that particular film or something else that is indispensable, right? So I think we actually need to do that shit. We need to watch this trash, not only because we fucking enjoy it at some level, right? Like, knowing how fucked up it is, but also because, like, inevitably we will bring our critical sensibilities to it and like have a take. Like, if somebody asks you what your fucking take is, it's going to come out the way you just said it. So like, I think we need to popularize that shit, right? We need to popularize that, like the reading practice. We need you, right? We fucking owe you one for that. But this is to say that what you're touching on the other side of kind of like the Zionist and global empires construction of a theater of conquest, warfare, and basically asymmetric violence around the term and concept or lexicon of terrorist. On the other side of that is this compulsory, like, liberal, white multiculturalist sensibility that courses through much of the global north and what used to be called the first world in particular, around a mandate to pacifism.
Message!
Which is something more, I mean, Ward Churchill's book teaches us this in Pacifism as Pathology, right? But it's something significantly more than the compulsory mandate to nonviolence, right? Which is always there too. So in other words, what people when I say people, I'm talking everything from state officials to kind of people who consider themselves or who others consider to be social movement leaders or so-called thought leaders, influencers, et cetera, et cetera. Like this whole compendium consortium of people who we assume we're supposed to listen to, right? They will use the term nonviolence, but what they're actually talking about is pacifism. So that's on the other side of the terrorism thing, right? So like it used like there was a moment, there was a long historical moment in which the notion of nonviolence was understood somewhere, depending on where you were, what the situation was. It was understood somewhere between tactic and strategy, or some blurry line between both. But it wasn't necessarily generally understood as ideology. You know what I mean? Or as like a principle. It was like, we're going to do this thing. We're going to approach the struggle with colonialism. We're going to approach the struggle with apartheid this way, using tactics and or strategies of nonviolence, because we've, you know, in our analysis of the situation, we think that it will yield these potential results, maybe create more room to other stuff. And here's the thing, right? Like something that folks probably who are listening and watching our conversation already know this, but I'll repeat it, which is that for almost that entire archive, historical archive of movements and people and collectives that engaged in strategic tactical forms of nonviolence, it was already understood that it was accompanied by some version of armed guerrilla war.
Now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
All right. So again, the link to the whole discussion is in the show description, but I just thought that whole little piece was very dope. And as Jared was saying in somewhat impromptu, and so the fact that it was off the cuff is even, you know, better in some ways. But one, that's again the point of the Vernon philosophy. It's not meant to be. It's as I was trying to argue, an intellectual boycott that just says, like Dylan was saying, we know we're going to engage some of this stuff, so let's bring a certain sensibility to it. Let's bring a certain reduction of the self-criticism for engaging it. Recognize that we are all in this. We're all caught up in the web to a certain extent. And we'll need to bring certain political sensibilities to it, to our peers, to our students, to our family, friends, etc., who will also, on some level, engage it directly or indirectly. And then, as we will be talking a little bit about in the context of buying power, there is this indirect sort of seepage of ideas that it is nice to be able to trace to a certain origin or foundation. Even when you don't deal with a podcast or a movie directly, the ideas are carried into the consciousness and the political behavior of people in our spheres, in our day-to-day lives anyway. So it is to just say, if you can have a take on it that brings a certain politics to it, and then bringing it back to what is actually happening in the context of what they were describing there, but in so-called Middle East and Israel and Palestine and the occupation and all of that, and then how it's narrativized, and then what is really being done here in terms of suppressing a certain militant politics. So I thought that was dope. I just wanted to salute, shout out to Jared and Dylan for that. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.